All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back after a long hiatus to Speaking of Jazz, where the West Michigan Jazz Society interviews local and perhaps not so local musicians. Um, now, interesting fact, I am no longer local to the West Michigan Jazz Society. So I am coming at you from Columbus, Georgia, with my guest tonight, who's probably one of the most wonderful people that I know. And I'm gonna wait for him to kind of introduce and talk about himself. I don't want to give away too much, but please extend a warm Facebook and otherwise welcome to Mr. Steve Talaga. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Hi, Jordan. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So you've been on the scene in Grand Rapids for a long time, and I'm not saying that as like an old thing.
No.
You've got experience, and when I met you, it was kind of a thing where it was like, oh man, this guy's been around. He's played with kind of like everybody, and everybody's like, oh yeah, Steve Talaga, he's the dude. Um, so I want to talk about to just get started, like how did you end up in Grand Rapids? Like, how did Grand Rapids end up lucky enough to have you in it, rather?
You're too kind. Um, Really, it was, oh gosh, I grew up in Bay City on the other side of the state. And I mean, I've lived in Michigan my whole life. And it's not like I've traveled to different places, of course, but I've only lived in Michigan. But went to Central Michigan University after high school and went to school there and got a broadcasting and journalism degree and worked there throughout the 1980s. And my wife, Jean, also went to CMU. And during those years in the 1980s, she was working on a doctoral degree in industrial organizational psychology. So she finally got that, or very nearly got that. She finished everything but her dissertation at the end of the 80s. And she had done an internship at Steelcase, and they came back and offered her a full time job. And at that time, I was working at the public radio station there in Mount Pleasant, WCMU. And her job at Steelcase paid about twice what I was making at the radio station. So we moved here. And it was at that point that I she went to work at Steelcase, and I decided to go back to school at Western and get a master's in music. I'd always, of course, had an interest in music, even in the days that I was pursuing broadcasting and journalism. And I had taken a lot of music classes at CMU, but I never finished the major. So I went to Western, got a second major, this time in music, jazz studies, and then a master's in theory and composition. So that's what brought us to Grand Rapids, actually, my wife's job. And before we moved here, I was doing, of course, I was working on my music on my own a lot. But Mount Pleasant, I mean, there were some gigs, but it wasn't like I was out a gigging musician. I mean,
Oh, don't I know it?
yeah, I had signed on as, I mean, at that point, the rest of my life looked like I'd probably just make a career out of public radio and journalism and do music on the side. Although I was very serious about it, but not as a living, making a living. And then when we moved here, we didn't have kids yet, and Jean said to me, "Hey, if you want to go back and to school and get a music degree, this is probably the time to do it." So, man, so she's an incredible person, of course, and um, that was just very generous on her part. So I did. I went back to school, and but that's what brought us to GR in the first place, was her career path.
Yeah, and I mean, what a path. I mean, I've played one gig for Steelcase, and when I walked in, I'd never been in their facility at all. And I'm walking in and seeing all of this glass, like all of these open spaces, and
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, where am I? Like
yeah,
where
it's a
where
pretty amazing place, really. I mean, they're the well, there was a time where it's like one quarter of Grand Rapids seemed like was Steelcase property, but of course they've slimmed down, as have all large companies. And um, they have those two facilities right at the corner of 44th Street and Eastern. Um, and those are amazing, amazing buildings. I mean, it's amazing, amazing stuff. If you're in the market for office furniture, you can do no better than Steelcase.
Yeah, very cool. So now you said you've always been interested in music, and what really piqued that interest for you?
Um, well, I grew up in a musical household. My mom played piano, mostly by ear. So there was always a piano in the house. And I started kind of picking tunes out and stuff when I was, I don't know, little, 4 years old or something like that. And my dad played kind of some drums a little bit in some polka bands back in Bay City. And my grandparents on both sides of the family really were really musical. My grandfather played violin and trombone in, I guess, in the pit orchestras back for silent films in Bay City. And my grandmother played piano. And I think that's kind of how they met, maybe. I'm not sure. But anyway, musical household. And so I always, from the day I was born, was surrounded by music. And I just started kind of plunking stuff out on the piano, young. I asked to take music or piano lessons in first grade. And my lessons throughout grade school didn't go so well. I was back and forth a few times, but I always wanted to kind of work on more on my own stuff than what the teacher wanted me to work on. So it wasn't really till much later. I didn't really take through high school, but once I got to college, then I was mature enough, I guess, to know that I had to work on what the teacher was telling me. So that was very helpful to go back and really dig into classical music in college, that kind of thing, as well as jazz, of course.
Yeah, and Steve, that's really something I've always admired about you as a musician is you don't turn your nose up at anything and turn like you have such an eclectic like slate of influences, like from
Right.
classical music to jazz to like some of this music that you were like telling me like about in some of your compositional influences, and so it's really very cool to see people who are just taking it all in. Can you talk a little bit about what motivates you and what inspires you, like as an artist in that way?
Well, I think my own musical tastes, in terms of what I love to listen to, are completely eclectic. I mean, there's stuff in pretty much every genre that I just really love to listen to, and I end up playing a lot of jazz, but and that's probably where I feel most comfortable in terms of playing, but also comfortable with a lot of other pop styles like rock and roll, uh, country, whatever. But gosh, I just love to listen to everything. I don't feel all that comfortable performing classical music. I like to play it on my own, but I don't know. That's a world that's it kind of terrifies me, quite honestly. I just feel much better in a situation where I can improvise more and where things aren't quite as I don't want to use the word rigid, but that's the word that comes to mind. But anyway, I don't know. Gosh, I remember at one point early on when I was a freshman in college and I was playing in the jazz band at CMU, and our the director of the band, Dr. Hayes, Robert Hayes, um, was talking about that one time with me. He said, the more eclectic you are, the more versatile you are, the more marketable you are. And if you want to make a living in music, it's important to be marketable, of course, across different genres. So that kind of stuck with me, but my interests were already in a lot of different directions. So that wasn't so much a stretch. I don't know. I think it stems from that. I mean, for me, the music I love playing is the music I love listening to. Um, and so I guess it's just that my tastes are broad in terms of what I like to listen to. So that's kind of what you know, influences my playing, I suppose. In terms of inspiration, uh, gosh, as you know, I mean, that can come from anywhere. I most times if I'm writing or even if I'm practicing improvising, I'm hearing in my head, I suppose, some of my favorite music by some of my favorite artists, and so naturally, probably what comes out tends to, if not seem like a copy of that stuff, it's certainly very much, influenced by what I like to listen to. And of course, you're always looking for your own original spin on things too. But I think very much of it is it's kind of informed by what you've heard and studied. And of course, some of my favorite piano players, like Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, of course, McCoy Tyner, Mulgrew Miller, Kenny Kirkland. And then outside of piano, John Coltrane. I mean, it's just the list is too long to name. But then I've tried to sort of combine what I've gotten from studying and listening to classical music too, especially modern classical music, in terms of certain compositional things like, although I haven't really applied 12-tone music exactly to jazz, some of those serial techniques have kind of influenced some of the more long-form things I've done, like Contemplating the Heavens or the Children of the Glacier Suite, those sorts of things. But in terms of just writing tunes, I don't know. I think it comes more from just kind of the stuff I've been listening to, I guess. But that's a great question. But it's, as you know, I mean, it's sort of hard to parse out exactly where your inspiration comes from. It's more often than not, it's a deadline. Quite honestly, if there's something you got to write some music for, even if it's self-imposed, like a gig next week with a trio, let's say I want to write a tune for that, then you've got a deadline, and then you sit down and you pound something out. It's as again, I mean, because you're a great composer and player, of course, and you know that it seems like it's seldom that something really like a lightning bolt out of the sky hits you and you have to run to the piano and write it down. It's more often you're in a situation where you're either given the opportunity or the obligation to write something, and then you sit down and the creative juices kind of start flowing. Or maybe you're improvising and something grows out of that. But it tends to be more, for me at least, when it's a situation where it's something's expected of you or you're expecting of yourself for a particular gig that's coming up. It's rare that you wake up in the middle of the night with an idea that hits you like a lightning bolt.
Absolutely. And you know what? I find myself, even if I do have ideas like that, fleshing them out is a whole other thing. And so
Absolutely.
that idea of craft, that idea of the perspiration element,
Right.
I find that especially, inspiring, motivating as deadlines loom.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, you just kind of try to come up with something, using, what you know.
Well,
And I
and
think
I think that's true. That's where the craft really does come into play, because, you know, you can take anything and make something out of it, right? I mean,
absolutely.
a small, in some cases, the smaller the idea, the more simple the idea, the better, because that leaves you then lots of room for development, interpretation. I think, just a small rhythm or a little snippet of a melody or whatever, if you start with something small like that, and then you can build all this other stuff out of it, spin it out into these melodies, which then give you ideas for harmony and so on.
Like, I mean, I think of tunes like Speak No Evil,
Mm-hmm.
Unity, just
Sure.
tunes where they're just like little small portion by Mulgrew Miller,
Right.
where they're just small ideas and then they're just beautifully fleshed out. Or like Last Season by Maria Schneider that's a tune that my band is playing right now. And so,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Man, her
yeah,
writing.
that like the piano solo at the beginning, and then she brings the first theme back in augmentation, and then all of a sudden
Yep.
there are these trumpet things around it, and it's like sooner than you know it, you have this like 5-minute odyssey of like
Yeah.
compositional ideas. And so
it's just, but it's totally organic. It springs from one small seed. And, I mean, that's one of the things that I really just love about studying music, like by Bach, for instance, Bach, even the little two-part piano inventions. There's so much to learn there about taking a small idea and different ways to manipulate that. It's just endless invention on a small germ of an idea.
And I think that's so cool. Like it's just the idea of that is, to me, like, I don't know. When I was younger, I was like, oh, I'm playing this solo and I can't repeat myself and
Right.
everything has to be this new thing or whatever.
Yeah, you have to throw everything into that one solo. Yeah.
And the older that I get, the more I realize if I just take a few little things and then just manipulate them through the changes, it's a far more like conversational and organic way to play. Why don't I just do that?
Exactly. Well, and you think about, at least for me, this is the case. Your very favorite solos by whichever artist, and for me, those are the ones that are at the very pinnacle of what I think of as a great jazz solo. Someone who takes an idea and just keeps manipulating that. And I mean, there's so many. Of course, Sonny Rollins is masterful at doing that, and but I mean, all of those guys, Wayne Shorter, the piano players, any of the great piano players. Chick Corea, there's this solo on oh gosh, it's on the Quartets album with Michael Brecker and Lenny White, and no, it's Steve Gadd on that record. Anyway, what's the one tune that's dedicated to Coltrane? It's Quartet number 2,
Yeah.
part 2, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you listen to that piano solo, I mean, the entire thing is built around 2 notes, or at least one little phrase that's maybe these three notes. He starts his solo after the head. He does this scale passage running up the keyboard, and then he ends it with this little gesture, and just kind of keeps referring to that throughout the whole solo and builds this huge thing out of this one little idea. So, I mean, even beyond compositionally, which I guess improvisation is, of course, it's composition, but in the moment, in real time, the greatest solos have that same element. There's a lot of other stuff going on in there too, but there's always that little germ of an idea that they start with that they then develop and build on. Yeah, that's just it. And as you said, it's conversational. I'm sorry, I'm going to walk over here, grab a charger because my power is getting low. I'm on my phone, but that is one of the elements that makes it like human speech, which I think improvisation is really. You're sort of using the patterns of speech and the same sort of logic and so on and phrasing and and that's what makes it relatable, whether everybody listening speaks English or not.
Well, and can you imagine, Steve, if we were having a conversation, but we tried to never repeat a word?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know how terrible first of all, how short that conversation would be, how quickly it would terminate. And then the other thing is, there would be the stupidest and most inane conversation known to man.
Yeah. Right. How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. I mean, it has to have, I think, a germ of an idea there, or something that gets the ball rolling, but then it's got to be continually evolving. Definitely.
Yeah, and I was playing Sonny Rollins' Way Out West album.
Oh yeah.
For one of my students, and I was like, listen to what he does. Just listen to what he does with a small idea, and he's taking it and now he's transforming it over this tune. So yeah, absolutely. Now, speaking of teaching, Steve, one of the things I know about you is that you you have a love and really, I think, a gift of teaching. And you've inspired countless number of students. And even though I was never directly your student, myself included, I think, I was your student on the bandstand when I was younger, and just really learning so many things from you. What makes you want to teach? Like, what, I mean, because when I saw you teach, it was never about like the paycheck. It was never about, doing a job. It was more like a vocation for you. And not to put words in your mouth, but you always seemed to love the students. And I'm wondering, where does that come from?
Well, I think, like anything in my professional life, whatever I've done as a teacher stems from just my love of music. Uh, I feel like for me, there are the people in my life, my family, certainly, my wife and kids, my family, my friends, and that's tier number one. But like right below that is music, the thing I love more than anything else. And I uh, I have never really considered myself a teacher, more a student, always trying to learn as much as I can about music. And truth be told, I'm always, at least, whenever I'm involved in teaching, I'm always learning as much as I'm teaching, from either from my students or from having to delve deeply into whatever it is I'm talking about so that I'm at least hopefully halfway prepared to talk about it. Um, and I think that's what it boils down to. It's just my love of music. And I think, I'll be honest, my goal was never to be a teacher. I just wanted to learn about music and play music, and write music. And the teaching has always been, quite honestly, kind of a byproduct of that. I mean, any of the teaching I've done at the colleges around the area or whatever have all grown out of my playing and stuff. Just whatever college, at whatever time happens to need somebody to teach jazz piano or whatever else. And I'll get a call or an email note or whatever. And it's not like, I don't think I ever really sought out, teaching jobs. Oddly enough, the teaching jobs I've gone for, the ones I've applied for, now that I think about it, I didn't get those jobs. Any teaching job I ever had was because, a friend of a friend and the school needed somebody to teach whatever it was, usually jazz piano, or which led then to some other classes at the schools, which I'm very grateful to have had. But it was always that kind of a thing. Just started out with like teaching just a few piano students because they had a need for a semester or whatever. And that's the way, now that I think about it, it started kind of at Aquinas. Because when I first moved to town, I contacted Bruce Early, who was then, a real jazz, passionate about pushing jazz in the area. And of course, he was on the faculty at Aquinas. So I contacted him when I first moved to town because I had known him and said, hey, I'm in town, I'm looking for gigs. Or whatever. And I started playing in the night band at Aquinas. And then it turned out that he had too many piano students, jazz piano students, for him to, to take on. But he said, if you wouldn't mind taking the overflow, I've got a couple of students. So that's how I got my foot in the door at Aquinas. And that led to, man, over the years, I ended up teaching, upper level theory stuff, which was, for me, such an incredible learning experience. I mean, I had taken those classes, but as you know, you're put in a position where you have to teach something and you have to have a whole other, much deeper level of understanding. So just any of the schools, it kind of turned out that way. When I was at Hope College, same thing. Bruce Early was teaching at Hope. When he passed away, Charlie Hodes gave Brian Coyle my name and said, maybe Steve could take over some of Bruce's jazz piano students. So Brian called me and we got together, and that's how I started at Hope, and So I never really had a goal to be a teacher. It just sort of came about as a byproduct. But I took it very seriously and still do. Of course, I've retired from college teaching, but I still have a few private students. But it's mainly for me, it's about the integrity of the art form and trying to live up to um, the awesome responsibility of teaching music.
Yeah, well, and you know, I think there's something really to be said about that. Let's talk about the integrity of the art form, and kind of where we're at in kind of in because it's a big responsibility, right? It's this to me it's this pretty lofty thing that I have this sense of like duty or responsibility. So tell me about your kind of your relationship with preserving the integrity of the art form or living up to that. Like, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, well, this is, your questions are so great. They're so open ended. It lets me just kind of ramble on because you've touched on like I don't know, the three or four things you brought up are like the essence of the whole gist of the whole thing, you know. So, all right, first of all, I think like most of us who are in music, the reason I do it is because it's fun. You know, that's at least what got me started. I just I love to listen to music, and once I figured out that I could not just sit and listen, but I could also make music, it's just fun. And that's probably the overall thing for me. The main thing is that I just enjoy writing and playing so much. And because I love that so much, then you know, talking about it with other people, you end up enjoying that too. And I think that's where the teaching kind of comes into play. But um so that's at the foundation, I think, just loving it so much, listening and playing it and writing it. Uh, and then I think not right away, but after you've been into it for a while and you start to realize the awesome achievements of musicians who are living at this time, but also who have come before us. I mean, the real masters, you know, uh, you start to realize just what an incredible um, dedication those people displayed. Uh, I mean, I love to play and I try, you know, I practice every day and stuff, but I don't, I, I'm not as, I have to be honest. I mean, I'm not immersed in it to the level that maybe like, you know, Chick Corea or Herbie Hancock or Oscar Peterson or J.S. Bach or Beethoven. You know what I mean? You can name whatever master across any genre you want. And, and you see, first of all, you know what you've put in and you see the results. And then you compare that with the results that someone like J.S. Bach gets, and you realize, you know, it feels like, well, I can speak for myself, like I've made a big commitment. But if I look at it, you know, it's nowhere near what someone like Coltrane or Charlie Parker invested. And of course, that explains their creative output. You know, I mean, yes, those people all have talent, but there's a heck of a lot of hard work that goes into honing that. And in many ways, what you end up with has a direct relationship to how much time you put in. And so that makes me feel like, I mean, I'm never going to devote myself to it in that way. And that's fine. We get one life and you have to decide what you're going to do with it. But I do love it enough that certainly, especially because of what those other people have achieved, I have such respect for the art form, not only from the aspect of the achievement of these great artists, but also from the standpoint that it so profoundly affects all of us as humans, you know, whether you're, I mean, regardless of what your involvement in music is, it's something that speaks across the board and is really vital to our existence as human beings. I think music, you know, uh, and it's an awe-inspiring thing. It's just so spiritual, and it's just so profound and defines us as human beings. And so if I'm going to be involved in the creation of music, I just want to be sure that although I'm not going to devote the time to it that Charlie Parker did, within my means and my vision of what I want my life to be, I'm going to devote to it as much as I can, and try to get into it as deeply as I can, and have respect for the art form, and not just ever sort of just go through the motions when I'm involved in making or writing music. Joe Henderson talked about this. He said, someone asked him about the intensity of his playing, and he said, well, every time I play as though it's the last chance I'll ever have to play, and I think that's great advice. And I try to approach it from that standpoint too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. And that what we do is so precious, that it's absolutely such an amazing thing that we do, and we have the opportunity to do. So, I mean, how incredible is that?
Yeah, it's a privilege.
So, let's see, a question, another question that I had. Think about when you're on the bandstand, and I've been fortunate enough to have been on the bandstand a number of times with you. When you're thinking about what you want to accomplish as a pianist, or let's just say as a keyboard player, because I know you play in a variety of settings, and an actual piano may not necessarily be your vehicle of choice. So, what do you think? Like, what do you try to bring to every gig, to every performance? What are some things that you try to bring?
All right. So the first thing, well, it's like the what is it? The Hippocratic Oath, the first do no harm. So I always try to, whatever the style of music or the situation or whatever, fit in, first of all, and not disrupt things or draw attention to myself, but try to find what I think I could contribute to make the music as a whole better. That's the first and foremost thing. And honestly, even if I'm playing solo, I'm thinking that same way, because I think at that point, if I'm by myself, the piano is like an ensemble, and I just want to be sensitive to the sound and the music. So that's the first thing. Gosh, beyond that, I mean, that's the main thing. You always tap back into that thing I talked about before about enjoying it. Right from before you start, have this enthusiasm should be building. And then as you jump in and you start to play, it's like, it should be, or you should be aiming for it to be, I think, just sheer joy. I mean, even if you're expressing dark emotions, there should still be that profound joy, is maybe not the right word, but pleasure, I don't know what it is, but profound connection that comes from making music. That should be there. And then I try to keep in mind, like I said, what's the best thing I could do right here at this point in time in the music to contribute, and not create problems or take away from the overall effect. And so, the situation determines across almost infinite parameters what that would entail. If it's a rock band, it's going to be one thing, of course. If it's a small little chamber jazz group, it's a very different thing. But I just try to listen to what's going on around me and find a way to fit in on one hand, and also contribute to what's happening. If it comes time for me to take a solo, then of course, the focus is more on, on me as a soloist or whatever. And so at that point, then I'm trying to listen more than anything else, listen to what it is I'm playing and respond as I would as a listener. Like I'm listening for what excites me when I listen to a great solo. And I'm just trying to do that, and listen to what I just played. Is there some germ of an idea in there I can use to spin off into something else? Um, like sequencing melodic ideas, play a little something, remember what it was you just played, and then use that again in some way, whether it's repeated at a different pitch level or manipulated, augmented, as you said, rhythmic augmentation or inverted or something, and not to make it like a math problem, because although it is kind of that too, that's not what you're doing in the moment, but trying to make it, again, going back to your term, conversational, trying to inject it with enough logic, but not have it be so, I don't know, you're just trying to go with the flow, establish a flow of, like we are with a conversation. So I guess that's how I break it down, Jordan. I think for me, it's finding a way to fit in and contribute. And then if it's a point where I'm supposed to be in the out front more, then just trying to play something I'd like to listen to.
I happen to think that the musical world would be a whole heck of a lot of a better place if everybody was playing something that they would like to listen to. I don't know if we think that way all the time as musicians. I wish we would, but I don't know if we always do. And at that point, it's kind of like, oh man, like really, do you want to listen to this all day? But at the same time, it's really good to have people like yourself who are like, okay, all right, let's figure this out and see if we can, play something that we would like to listen to. That's great. So when you, we were talking before about some other keyboard players, and I think in the tradition of jazz music, particularly, there's a really cool tradition of like multiple different kinds of keyboard instruments being like okay, and I'm wondering particularly about the Hammond organ, and I know you have and had, when you were at Hope College, a pretty close relationship with Tony Monaco, but also with his organ summit. And I was wondering if you could talk about, because it seems like that is in little, like smaller pockets these days. But I'm wondering if you can talk about kind of what you think about these multiple jazz keyboard instruments, and kind of like the fun that is present, the opportunity, and kind of what you think their relationship even to one another would be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love all the electronic keyboards, every instrument to me. I mean, I know some people are kind of maybe more purists where they like just acoustic piano or whatever, and that's fine. But for me, I like anything, I mean, one of my big influences, I guess you want to call it that or whatever, people I listen to just so thoroughly, and even bought some sheet music and learned some of this stuff, was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Keith Emerson. Man, and the sounds he would get out of those old sort of first generation analog synths, and he'd take the time to layer them and create these harmonies and stuff. And just, I mean, his soloing, for me at that time was just mind blowing. And so, when I was in high school, I bought some of the sheet music for some of that stuff. Like there was a tune called The Sheriff, which has this great like ragtime sort of honky tonk piano at the end. And I had studied and worked on and learned a number of the Scott Joplin rags back in 7th and 8th grade. So when I got to high school and I hear Keith Emerson starting to use some of those same types of things and a few of those tunes from ELP, that's one of the things that really struck a chord with me. So anyway, but that was all that stuff on those albums in the midst of all those electronic keyboards was all acoustic piano, now I think of it. But all the organ stuff he did with, on every single album. I mean, that very first ELP album, tons of great organ playing on there. And that wasn't even a B3 yet, from what I understand. It was actually one of the Hammond, like an M100 or something like that. And actually, I ended up getting one of those. I've got one in my basement, and so I can say I have a Hammond organ. It's not a B3, but it still sounds great. It's the same model that was on that tune Green Onions too, which I always assumed those were B3s, but they weren't. They were the
So did I. I assumed that's what those were too.
Yeah, no, they're the from what I understand from reading about them, a number of those early like 60s pop tunes were not B3. They were the M100, or there were a number of different letters associated with them, but they were essentially spinet organs that were meant for home use, and they weren't like the big B3, but the same sound, all the same technology. So they sound, obviously, because the recordings sound that way, they sound just like a B3. But anyway, I've always loved, and as soon as I started getting exposed to like Miles Davis Bitches Brew and On the Corner, and I mean all those things he did with electric keyboards, and of course Herbie and Chick, everything that they've done over the years, I just love that stuff. And I've got a whole bunch of, probably too many synthesizers, like rack mount synths and just all kinds of stuff. I don't take them out on gigs that often, but I do mess around with them at home a lot, and actually do sort of a little bit of recording and overdubbing and stuff on my own home computer. But I'm totally behind all of that. And this Nord that I tend to use on gigs these days.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, it's got, I mean, anything you can imagine in terms of synth sounds on there, you can do with it. And on rare occasions, I do get to use that. I did a gig with the GR Symphony a month or so ago. I think it was in September or early October or something. Anyway, it was all a tribute to the 80s, So it was all synth. I mean, there were a few tunes that used some acoustic piano too, but the majority of it was different synth sounds. And actually, that for me was one of the hair-raising parts of the gig. Was just every tune had a different patch, that I had to call up quickly, before the next number started, and just the logistics of that just kind of made me nervous. But I love electronic keyboards. Always have.
That's so cool. So we obviously know that we as musicians, well, we as humans, are in an unprecedented time. So I'm wondering, like, have you been able to get back to, gigging? You just talked about you did something with the GR Symphony, but I know you were kind of, you were playing it real safe, which is great, I think, before. And so I'm wondering, have you been able to get out and play many gigs lately? And are there any projects you're really excited about?
Yeah, well, yes, actually, the answer is yes. Gigs have kind of started to come back online. Not at all the same places they were at before, but and maybe not quite as busy, but it's, I mean, given the black hole that the previous 18 months had been, it's wonderful. Some things that aren't happening yet that I sure would love to see happen again. Of course, Founders used to have the Grand Rapids Jazz Orchestra play first Sunday of every month, and I'd sure love to see that come back. Randy Marsh's Speakeasy Jam session on Sunday nights, love to see that come back. And in the case of those two things, the reason they haven't come back is because of staffing. This whole nightmare, that's happened with staffing over the last couple of years. So they just can't find enough people to to run things, to keep the place open and accommodate the live music and so on. I used to do once a month at Sandy Point Beach House with a trio, and that went away. And I've been back and played a few times just solo on rare occasions, but I really missed that trio gig. And, you know, during or right after COVID, they just didn't have the budget to pay a three-piece. So maybe it's time to hit them up again. I don't know. But that was kind of a steady gig, only, once a month, but still really look forward to it. But that hasn't come back. But I'm doing some brunches at Old Goat. In fact, this coming Sunday, I'll be playing there with Tom Lockwood and Larry Ochiltree. That's 11 to 2 on Sunday this coming week.
Terrific. That's great.
Yeah. I play occasionally just some solo piano stuff down at the Copper Rock Restaurant in South Bend at the casino down there at Four Winds Casino. And I enjoy that. It's just a solo piano gig. This Thursday, I'll be playing at Euro Bistro with a trio. First time playing with these folks. And I think the time frame is 6 to 9, and it's their normal piano player is not available, so I'll be filling in. Euro Bistro on 28th Street. That's this Thursday, 6 to 9 p.m. Yeah, what else? There are a few other things coming up. Next week, Thursday, a week from tomorrow, I'll be playing at the Book Nook in Montague, solo piano. That's a nice gig. It's a beautiful 7-foot concert piano, a Schimmel, gorgeous instrument. So that's 7 to 9 a week from tomorrow. So just odds and ends like that, playing the Blue Llama Jazz Club next Tuesday night with Walter White's band, and that's in Ann Arbor. Looking forward to that one. So things have started coming back online, but not everything I'd like to have seen, not yet.
Yeah. Whoops. I think there are a lot of people who are really, really looking forward to have all of the especially those, the monthly GRJO,
yeah,
and the weekly Randy Marsh Jazz Jam. I think really excited to have those come back. I understand the problems, they're, but man, I would miss those too.
I know, I do too. And it's hard to believe. You would think that, well, who knows what caused this? I mean, we know what caused the staffing shortage, COVID in some way, but in terms of specifically what has caused the staffing shortage, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't think it's entirely the unemployment benefits that everybody started being able to get. I mean, most of that has ended now anyway, as I understand. So you think people would be clamoring for jobs. I don't know. It's so weird how this virus has impacted every aspect of our lives.
It is. Yet, it's really interesting. I'm seeing a lot of places with these super high vaccination rates that are able to pretty much, there are a lot of things going on in a very positive way. So
yeah, if we can all get vaccinated, but that's a personal choice. And
yeah, it's a personal choice, and I think I understand.
I wish everybody felt about it the way I do, but they don't.
I wish that everybody felt the way that you do about a lot of things, but that never stopped anybody. So hey, it's Ivan. Ivan's on. Hey, Ivan, how you doing?
Hey, Ivan. Speaking of people I admire and look up to.
There you go. Yeah. So I want to close with just talking about. So you've done a lot of great writing and some great projects, some wonderful like albums of original material. You had a group with Rob Smith. You played Mind's Eye that had some really wonderful material. Lots of other things. Can you tell me about, like, compositionally, if you've got anything coming down the pipeline? Or I know you did some writing for GRJO and recorded some of that material as well during COVID. Just thinking about, your material and kind of what's next compositionally and things?
Well, man, I don't have anything in the works right now. There's a concert that we're kind of looking toward and planning. I'm hesitating because I don't know how much I should really talk about it, but I guess it's fine to talk about. It's next April. I think the date is April 10th at CMU. The idea, the pipe dream, and we still haven't talked to all the moving pieces yet, but is to hopefully have Mind's Eye do the first half of the recital, and then CMU's big band do the second half of the recital, and on that portion do all original music by members of Mind's Eye, so me and Tom Lockwood and Rob Smith, and we've had a number of drummers over the years. I don't know, kind of depends on who's available, etc. for who's gonna. But Keith Hall was the first drummer in the group, and so we usually talk to Keith first, and then Quincy Davis was the second drummer. So if Keith can't do it, talk to Quincy, and then Andrew Zimovsky was the third drummer, and if Keith and Quincy can't do it, then I guess Andrew. But I don't know. Anyway, we're looking toward this April date, but I don't know that I'll be writing anything new for that. Most of my writing since the pandemic has just been like just tunes, like lead sheets. So it could be played just solo piano or trio or duo or whatever. It's writing, jazz tunes. And it hasn't been much of that actually. I've had some things over the last few months where performances where the piano part was pretty hairy. And so much of what I've been doing musically actually over the last few months has been practicing and focus more on the playing part than the writing, because I don't know, I had that symphony gig coming up, and I had to really sink a ton of time into not only learning the music, which it's 80s pop music, but there's a lot going on in the keyboard parts.
Oh yeah,
that stuff.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that took a lot of practice, just learning the music, and then also the synths thing, getting all that worked out with the patches and the quick patch changes and all that. And then shortly after that, then I started working on. I did the Phil Woods saxophone and piano sonata with Gary McCurry at Aquinas.
Oh, how cool!
Yeah, and so then right after the symphony thing, I was digging into learning that. So honestly, over the last few months, I haven't really been writing much at all. It's been primarily practicing. And then we took a wonderful family vacation out to Arizona. Just got home, early Sunday morning from that. So I really honestly haven't been writing that much, but I'm hoping something comes along here, because it's been a little while,
Hey, nothing wrong with practicing. I would never.
Another thing. I had a Rhodes. I got a Rhodes from my parents. Actually bought me this Rhodes back when I was in high school in 1978 or something, an 88 stage Rhodes, and I've always loved it. And it was starting to sound or feel kind of rough and a little bit dead spots and so on. So anyway, I took it to the Chicago Electric Piano Company and had them kind of redo the whole thing, And I just got that back on Sunday. So I've actually been spending a lot of time. It plays better than it did when it was brand new. And so I've been spending a lot of time just messing around with my Rhodes now that I've got that back home.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, we do have a question to kind of close us up here. Ivan says, I want to ask how the pandemic has impacted Steve's musical imagination, especially with composing. Is lament reflected or hope in the music?
Yeah, well, I haven't been writing all that much. I have, though, a little bit. Not really recently, but actually in the worst of it. I don't know. It's hard to say, because and it's probably true for you and any of us, when I'm writing the music, I'm not so much, for me at least, it's more purely musical ideas that don't necessarily relate to feelings like specific feelings like hope or lamentation. I mean, sometimes though, if I'm really sad about something, I suppose, getting it out emotionally. But honestly, I haven't been doing a ton of writing, but again, practicing and improvising, practicing improvising has been what I've really been sinking myself into over the last 2 years, more than writing, I think. And in a somewhat free-form way, not like real regimented practice, but more, improvising, practicing, just improvising, playing. And I think what you're asking about, because when you're improvising, of course, you're composing. It's the act of composition, just done in real time, without the opportunity to go back and, change things. So I think very much it's been like it's sort of come about as a result of like reaction to whatever mood I'm in at the moment. So if I happen to feel hopeful as I'm doing that, it probably comes out more that way, or maybe more. I don't know how that would even be expressed in music. Major key, maybe, or maybe not even. I don't know. But I'm not sure I can even answer the question, because I don't know. I think I don't know. It's been always just like focusing on the musical aspect and not so much the mood or whatever.
And I think Ivan just said he meant improvising because it is real-time composing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and if you're feeling, for me at least, if I'm feeling, especially if I'm feeling sad or angry, that's when I think the music probably reflects what's going on. If I'm feeling joyful, I don't know. It's more like I need the music in that way when I'm feeling bad. When I'm feeling good, I don't know. It's not as necessary to sit down and just let it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
So,
I completely understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, my whole first record came from those sorts of emotions and needing to get those out. So,
Right.
Yeah. Well, Steve, man, so great to catch up with you. Thank you so much for being on the program. I wanted to start it back up and was kind of going through some different ideas and I said, of course, I was going to have Steve earlier, and it didn't end up happening. So I'm really excited that we're restarting the series with you. And like Ivan says, you're the best. I appreciate your thoughts so much, Steve. Thanks for being on the program, and have a great night.
Oh, thank you for the invitation again, Jordan. Take care.